welcome guests from across Canada. You are welcome here. My name is Suzanne Perrault. I'm the Executive Director of AutismBC, and I'm joining you today from the unceded and traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Kaintsay, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. I offer this land acknowledgement with respect and gratitude, recognizing these lands as a place of relationship, responsibility, and ongoing presence. I honor the people who have cared for these lands since time immemorial, and I commit personally and organizationally to be listening and supporting and learning pathways towards truth and reconciliation and justice. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the wide variety of minds, experiences, and ways of being represented here. At AutismBC, we hold deep respect for neurodivergent ways of sensing and thinking, communicating, and connecting. We recognize that distress, struggle, and support needs do not always look the same, and they're not always immediately visible. For those of you who may be newer to our community, AutismBC is British Columbia's first and only autistic-led advocacy and education organization as a registered charity. We provide province-wide non-clinical neuroaffirmative programs and services supports to empower and connect autistic people and their families across the lifespan. Our work is deeply rooted in lived experience through accessible information and referral support, peer groups, social opportunities, and educational workshops. We have coordinators in the Lower Mainland, the Northern BC, Interior, Vancouver Island. AutismBC currently supports more than 13,000 members across the province in a diverse and intersectional way. Since 1975, our dedicated team, many of whom are neurodivergent parents and or caregivers and individuals themselves, have worked to foster inclusion, understanding, and a strong sense of being. AutismBC Talks are online presentations that center the lived experience, knowledge, and diverse perspectives within the autistic community. Our talks aim to spark curiosity, promote learning, and strengthen community through connections and shared knowledge. Before moving into our discussions today, I'd like to share a few grounding notes to support accessibility and care during the time together. We've received a wonderful response in our advanced question submission, and we'll be working through these to the best of our ability with Dr. Greene during the session. The chat is open and being moderated to support safety, accessibility, and respectful engagement. If additional questions arise that we feel are important, we will be doing our best to bring these conversations forward as time permits. There's no expectation to participate. You're welcome to listen, step away if you need, return as you can, engage in ways that feel right for you, essentially. Self-care is always encouraged and respected here. That being said, it's truly an honor to welcome Dr. Ross Greene. Dr. Greene is a clinical psychologist, author, and originator of the collaborative and practice solutions approach, often referred to as the CPS model. His work has helped shift how caregivers, including myself, educators, systems, understanding systems, and working with distressed behavior and unmet needs, moving away from punishment compliance towards collaboration, dignity, compassion, and support that fosters self-agency and belonging. Dr. Greene's most recent work, which is why we're here today, The Kids Who Aren't Okay, invite us to look closely as why so many children and youth are struggling, particularly those whose struggles may be less obvious or more easily misunderstood. The book is emphasizing understanding behavior as communication, meeting people where they're at, and addressing the barriers that make expectations hard to meet, rather than blaming or trying to fix the individual. As part of AutismBC's April programming during Autism Acceptance Month, we'll be giving away one copy of The Kids Who Aren't Okay in each of our regions across the province to support our members. Details will be shared through our membership email and through our social media channels. AutismBC is a not-for-profit organization, and we're deeply thankful for the support and that make learning like this possible, bringing Dr. Ross Greene in. If you wish to support our work, optional donations and memberships are available with no obligation. And with that being said, I want to thank you again for joining us. And it's my pleasure, deep pleasure and honor to welcome you, Mr. Ross Greene.
Suzanne, thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm very glad to be here.
So good to see you.
You as well. I'm going to forego slides. I want to keep this slightly casual. And Suzanne, I want to emphasize, I think I'm going to give an overview of the CPS model for about 20, 25, 30 minutes. But because the questions that people have looked so appealing to me in terms of things we can dive into. I'd like to get to questions sooner than later. So maybe about a half an hour on the CPS model, and then we'll dive into questions. That sound okay?
I am so honored and happy to follow your lead, and I think our participants would be so delighted, given the climate in our province right now, to be able to do exactly what you're proposing for us.
Excellent. But I think an initial overview is good just to get us all on what we might call a level playing field, if there is such a thing. Collaborative and proactive solutions is the name of the model. It's the model I described a really long time ago in The Explosive Child, and then Lost at School, and then Lost and Found, and then Raising Human Beings, and now in The Kids Who Aren't Okay. The subtitle of that book, which came out only about 2 weeks ago, is The Urgent Case for Reimagining Support, Belonging, and Hope in Schools. And one of the things it talks about first is the alarming rates that we're seeing of depression and anxiety and chronic school absenteeism and suicidality and concerning behavior in our kids. Those trends were in motion before COVID. COVID didn't help, but those trends were in motion before COVID, and those trends tell us all is not well. So in looking at why all is not well, and this is the reason, quite frankly, the primary reason that I wrote the book. It's an all is not well book. Let's figure out why and let's do something about it. Boy, there have been a lot of developments over the last 20 to 30 years that have made it, societal developments, that have made it a lot harder to be a kid. And I roll through them in chapter 1 of The Kids Who Aren't Okay. I'm not going to spend tons of time on them now. The ones that bother me the most, why it's more difficult to be a kid these days, are the ones that are most diametrically opposed to what I believe is the definition of good teaching and good parenting. And it's the same for both. Meeting all kids where they're at. That's it. That's the mission. Meet kids where they're at. And so, as you might imagine, I'm not a real big fan of high stakes testing, where we told educators that they had to get every student over the same bar by the end of the school year. That's not meeting kids where they're at. That's not being attuned to the developmental variability that's walking in the door. That's not nothing. That's putting all kinds of pressure on kids and educators to get over the bar. But the bar, if you're meeting every kid where they're at, then each kid is their own reference point for progress. That's meeting every kid where they're at. So I'm not big on high stakes testing. I think it's turned a lot of schools into pressure cookers. A lot of educators have told me that it turned them into test prep robots. A lot of educators have said to me that they've taken a lot of the humanity out of the job. I think it's time to put the humanity back in the job. The other one that I want to mention, and there's more than a dozen things that I mention in chapter 1 of the new book that have made it harder to be a kid, is zero tolerance policies in schools. this is where we clamped down even tighter on misbehavior, mostly through ramping it up on adult-imposed consequences, especially punishment. Many people don't know this, but zero tolerance policies were intended as a response to Columbine and were intended to keep schools safer. The research is in on zero tolerance policies. They definitely did not keep schools safer. There have been over 400 school shootings in North America post-Columbine. They made things worse. And those are only two. But that's the ecosystem kids and educators are functioning in schools. There's things related to society in general that I'm not going to bring up because I'm trying to be brief here. It's harder to be a kid. Many people, I'll just mention one more, are very focused on social media, which I definitely think is a factor. The most definitive thing we can say about social media right now and its effect on children's mental health is that it's the kids who are overusing it the most whose mental health is most likely to be adversely affected. But it's a more complex issue than it is sometimes being presented as. There's definitely things in social media that is specifically not wonderful for boys. There's things that are specific to girls that are not wonderful. There's all kinds of things that are specific to all kinds of people that are not wonderful in social media. That said, many members of the neurodivergent community would say that social media has been quite helpful to them at helping them find community and support. So clearly, this is not a black and white issue. But the big question is this: given those astronomical rates of depression and anxiety and concerning behavior and suicidality and chronic school absenteeism, does that tell us anything about the school ecosystem and how it can be user-friendlier for kids who are struggling, user-friendlier for every kid? I'm one of those people who believes that if we structured schools around the needs of the kids who are struggling, the kids who aren't struggling would do even better. The problem is that that's not the current setup, and the reverse is not true. Schools are largely structured around the kids who are doing okay, and we're leaving a lot of kids behind. So what to do? Well, you've already heard some of what to do. We need to make sure that we're operating on a definition of good teaching and good parenting that works for all kids, meeting every kid where they're at. Being attuned to developmental variability. A lot of developmental variability, just a fancy way of saying every kid is different. To me, that's the biggest challenge for educators. Every kid is different. How do we meet them all where they're at? How do we help get teachers out from under a lot of these onerous structures that make it harder for them to meet kids where they're at, even though a lot of those structures were intended to make it easier for educators to meet kids where they're at? And what do we do when a kid is struggling, when we're doing our best to be attuned to their developmental variabilities, to meet them where they're at, and we're still not quite there? And that, of course, is where I think solving problems collaboratively and proactively comes in. If a kid is meeting an expectation, there is no problem to solve. It's not what I would call an unsolved problem. But if there's any expectation a kid is having difficulty reliably meeting, um, that's what we in the collaborative and proactive solutions model would call an unsolved problem, also known as a problem that has yet to be solved, also known as a problem that is waiting to be solved. How do we know it's still waiting to be solved? Because the kid is still not meeting the expectation, and because in the case of many kids, that unsolved problem is still setting in motion concerning behavior. Concerning behavior, operating on the premise that all behavior is communication. Now, there's a cliche. Cliches tend to lose their meaning if we say them too often. That cliche should never lose its meaning. But what is concerning behavior communicating to us? That there's an expectation a kid is having difficulty meeting. And that's why I call concerning behavior the kid's frustration or distress response. The kid is telling us something. This is why I've been saying lately, non-compliance is good. Non-compliance and other concerning behaviors are good. Not that you're wishing for them, but because they're telling you something. They're telling you that a kid is struggling. And as I always say to parents and educators and staff in treatment facilities, you want to know that, right? And yet, for years, not compliance has been the holy grail. A non-compliant kid, not good, actually, by my way of thinking. Non-compliant kid, good, because non-compliance tells you that a kid is struggling. Not only that, non-compliance is informative if us caregivers take the time to figure out what's getting in the way of the expectation being met that the kid is not complying in meeting. What have we been viewing non-compliance as forever? Attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing. What have we been doing with non-compliance forever? We've been trying to reward kids to comply with expectations, and we've been punishing them when they don't. We've been trying to extinguish non-compliance through a mix of rewards and punishments. I find that it's a whole lot more effective to handle non-compliance when we identify the unsolved problems that are causing it proactively, because this isn't the first time Tommy has had difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. It's the 197th time Tommy has had difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. That makes that an old unsolved problem. Most unsolved problems are old. Let me replace the word old with predictable. And let me say that if unsolved problems are predictable, they can be identified proactively. And after they're identified proactively, they can be solved proactively. There, in just 10 minutes, you've got most of my life's work. How to help kids solve problems collaboratively, meaning the kid is an integral, indispensable part of the problem-solving process, and proactively, meaning not in the heat of the moment. So in chapter 3 of The Kids Who Aren't Okay, chapter 3 is called Set Up to Be Late. So many of the things we teach educators and parents to do. Teaches them what to do when it's becoming or is already late. One of the practices I find most troubling is restraining kids when it's already late. That's a crisis management practice. So is popping a kid into a seclusion room. So is de-escalating. By the time you're de-escalating, you're late. An unsolved problem has already set in motion concerning behavior. If you're seeing concerning behavior, you're late already. And if the concerning behavior is bad enough, we're de-escalating later still. And if that doesn't get the job done, we're laying hands on the kid in the form of a restraint or seclusion later still. We've been training people to be late. We've been putting a lot of energy into teaching kids what to do when it's already late, when they're already frustrated. You are setting things up to be late if the primary thing you're focused on is a kid's concerning behavior. Because if concerning behavior is a frustration or distress response, then the kid is already frustrated or distressed about something. And that something is an unsolved problem. I'm going to repeat myself here, which is old and therefore predictable. And if it's predictable, it can be identified and solved proactively. Now, to identify those unsolved problems, and you can find this on the website of the nonprofit I founded, Lives in the Balance, and it's free. You'll find an instrument known as the Assessment of Skills and Unsolved Problems, or ASAP, Assessment Gold. It's going to help you get in front of all those unsolved problems. A lot of people who I talk to, especially in schools, tell me that managing crises is a given. No, it's not. It's not a given. It's just because of the way things are structured. It's been structured to focus on behavior, and we've been teaching people what to do to manage crises for a very long time. Those things don't have to be that way. Those aren't givens. We, with a little intentionality and with a little commitment, we could be structured to be early. So when school leaders say to me, Russ, I would love to see one of the schools that's implementing the CPS model. I'd love to go on a visit. I say, fantastic, but you might not see anything. See, what they're expecting to see is out of control kids being de-escalated. You wouldn't see that in a school doing collaborative and proactive solutions. What they're expecting to see is unsolved problems popping up surprisingly, unexpectedly. You're not going to see that in a school that's implementing the CPS model. See a
Ross,
school that
if
is.
that, I wonder, Dr. Ross, if that that expectation for problems is actually setting this child up for unmet needs to occur real time, by indicating that, this is the expectation, it's the norm for us to be walking into.
It is the norm for what people expect to be walking into.
Right.
But that's because in a lot of schools, we aren't necessarily meeting kids where they're at. We're placing expectations on kids without taking account where the kid is at, without the kid being their own reference point. This is why in the CPS model and in the kids that aren't okay, I talk about a concept called expectation management. Expectation management means we should be taking a very close look at whether a kid can actually meet an expectation at this point in their development. We don't want to sell any kid short. Just because they can't meet it at this point in their development doesn't mean they can't meet it at another point in their development. But it makes no sense to put expectation on a kid if we already know the kid can't meet it. Cause frustration responses and all that goes along with those frustration responses, which is still very often punitive, exclusionary discipline.
And many expectations are unspoken or carry a deep lack of understanding, that we're setting an expectation, that we're asking them to rise up to something that they don't even understand and or developmentally can't even achieve. And so in that distress response is evoked from them as a byproduct of how the system is setting the platform for them to stand on, theoretically.
You're speaking my language. Let me just cover a little bit about the problem-solving process, and then how about we jump to questions? Sound good?
Lovely.
So, because a lot of kids, once we finally get around to identifying their unsolved problems, are going to have a lot of them, and because you can't solve all of them at once, some are going to have to be put on hold for now. Because if you try solving them all at once, you'll end up solving none of them at all. Putting an expectation on hold is what we call Plan C. Why would you do Plan C? Because you can't solve everything at once, but also because of expectation management. You might decide that an unsolved problem is being handled with Plan C because you don't think the kid can even meet the expectation right now. And then the other reason you'd use Plan C is for stabilization purposes. There are some kids who are so unstable, volatile, reactive, that they may not be in a position to meet almost any expectations right now. We're going to have to help them get back up on their feet before we can start throwing expectations at them. That's Plan C. Then we got two other options, Plan A and Plan B. Those are problem-solving options, but Plan A is where the problem is being solved unilaterally. The adult's on their own. The adult's flying solo. The adult is divining what's getting in the kid's way, and the adult is divining what the solution is to what the adult conceives is getting in the kid's way. That's why it's unilateral. Plan A does not designate that it is the preferred option, although, at least at this point in human evolution, it is still the go-to option for many adults, especially under duress, but even not under duress. A lot of human beings become unilateral when they're in the heat of the moment. Good reason to get people out of the heat of the moment.
That trauma response, fight, flight, freeze, becomes a very important conversation that adults, I believe, need to pay attention to in their reactive experiences to that. As you speak that, that's what I think of as individuals who are experiencing a heightened emotion to that child's, distress response, and not being attuned to themselves as they're mirroring it back out as it collides with that unmet expectation.
Yes.
And there's a conversation there, right?
All the more reason to get people out of the heat of the moment. It is in the heat of the moment that all of us need to stay on top of our distress or frustration or trauma response. But if we're not in the heat of the moment, that becomes a bit less critical. In any event, Plan B is where the problem is being solved collaboratively with the full involvement of the kid and proactively. You don't want to be doing this primarily in the heat of the moment. So last bit of teaching here, Plan B consists of 3 steps. The empathy step, the define adult concern step, and the invitation step. The empathy step is where we are gathering information from the kid about what's making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation. Your number one source of information on what's making it hard for a kid to meet an expectation in this model is the kid. And people who are skeptical about that in the beginning often ask the question, what makes you think the kid knows? And my pat response is 35 years of asking. I'm always telling people, be prepared for surprises in the empathy step when you discover that what you thought was getting in the kid's way is not what's getting in the kid's way. And people who learn well visually can see all kinds of examples of the empathy step on the Lives in the Balance website, either in the guided tour or in the CPS with young kids section, where people can see this being done with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, which blows a lot of people away because they didn't think a kid who's 3, 4, or 5 could participate in the process of solving the problems that are affecting their lives. The second step, by the way, something very important about the empathy step is it's where the kid has voice. It's where the kid will be heard, not just where we're getting information we didn't have. This is where people get heard. And I haven't met
In
anybody
that,
yet who didn't want to be heard.
in that empathy step, I met you years ago, over a decade ago. And I have led one of my children, diagnosed autistic, under that conversation of the highly explosive child. And I remember meeting you in a conference room in Vancouver. You came to speak, and I was sharing my story with you. And there was a couple of things that you told me that are just so rich in this conversation around that empathy. Number one, you affirmed me as a parent and let me
Mm.
know I was on the right track because of how I was approaching care for my child and support for this youngest one, that I was on the right track and trusting my instincts versus doing the disciplinary approach with excessive boundaries and consequence. The other thing that you spoke into my heart that I carry to this day in all the work that I have done and continue to do is you talked about around that empathy step about capturing the child's heart, and understanding who that child is, so that when they're communicating to us, that level of trust is present, and that child can come into my space trusting I'm also going to trust what's coming from them is their truth. And it was one of the most pivotal points for me as a parent, guiding this little human who used to be an eloper, a child who used to run away, who was highly explosive and would break things and hit and harm and self-harm and other harm. And it really was a massive shift in what my own self-regulation looked like,
Mm.
so that I could co-regulate with this guy and breathe forward those next steps that you're about to guide us into. And I think it's really critical because at least it led to self-agency for him and self-determination in a very powerful way. And so I want to lift that component that you're emphasizing right now up in a good way.
Good. The reason I like the name of the empathy step is because it involves listening and understanding, which are the two purest forms of empathy. I was listening to a speaker on a completely different topic last night. The topic was actually vaccinations. And she was an epidemiologist, and she was saying that trust is in very short supply these days. And I agree. I think listening is in short supply these days. I think empathy is in short supply these days. These 3 steps, you haven't heard about the other 2 yet, are very trust engendering. Listening to each other, taking each other's concerns into account, very trust engendering, very relationship engendering, very communication engendering. The second step is called the define adult concerns step. This is where the adult is entering their concern into consideration, as I always say, the very same concern they might previously have tried to get addressed through use of plan A. They are now getting addressed through use of Plan B. Same concern, completely different approach to getting it addressed. No loss of authority, no loss of anything. Quite frankly, all you're losing is a bunch of frustration responses. And then the invitation step is where kid and caregiver are collaborating on a solution, but a solution that needs to address the concerns of both parties, and one that is also realistic. The very concerns that were identified in those first two steps of Plan B. Here's what I've been saying a lot lately. If the solution is not realistic and mutually satisfactory, I promise you this problem is still unsolved. Where do us human beings go wrong so often, and what is among the reasons that I am so passionate about this model? Us human beings frequently skip the first two steps and head straight for solutions, which we start hurling at each other. That is known as a power struggle. It's a win-lose proposition. In a power struggle, all we're trying to figure out is who's going to win and who's going to lose, and who's going to win in a power struggle. Whoever has the power. So all we're doing in a power struggle is jockeying around trying to figure out who has the power. When you're solving problems collaboratively, it is a win-win proposition. Who's going to win? Both of you.
Everybody. Yeah.
You both got your concerns addressed. That's the CPS model. And I think we did that in around the timeline that we tried.
So we sure did. And I think sometimes when I think about some of this conversation, Dr. Greene, is if I expedite this into adult relationships in order for the support of mirroring it back down to how we can lead and support our children and youth, it's when you talk about the power struggle, power over, essentially, right? It's the equivalent to one of the parties in the adult relationship to say, it's fine, I'm fine. And it's that swallowing of emotion, right, that allows space for it to erupt again later on down the road in that relationship, where it becomes a festering experience of loss of voice, loss of agency, loss of trust in the relationship. And when we're not supporting that experience of voice of the child and recognizing those distress responses, we're teaching them to do that. And it leads into, I think, in terms of my other work that I do, and some even the advocacy conversations we're talking about in the province today, where when we're talking about children going into youth and going through puberty and being neurodivergent and not being able to have voice and not having the right supports injected into their world, they've been kind of outwardly that quiet looking, low support, whatever that means, person. And then an eruption occurs within their spirit, for lack of a better term. And we're witnessing self-injurious behavior. We're witnessing self-harm. We're witnessing suicidal ideation. We're witnessing absenteeism from school, right? We're witnessing all these experiences that down the road bring harm to our kids, and then into young adulthood and adulthood as they carry it into their future relationships. And so your work is so pivotal in this conversation, because it's not just about childhood, it's lifelong experience. It goes across the lifespan. And the courage you carry to bring that conversation forward in such a stabilized, safe way is deeply appreciated. And I thank you for that.
Thanks.
That being said, we have a lot of questions coming in. So some of the pre-questions that we received, we talked about, where the difference of, kids doing poorly and kids who aren't okay. Can you share an example of an adult's assumption about a child's unintentional escalation in a situation, how the CPS model can reframe it?
Well, what the research has been telling us for 40 or 50 years is that maladaptive frustration responses are due to skills that kids are struggling with, especially in the global domains of flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving, and emotion regulation. The research has been telling us that for a long time, and yet a lot of adults still think that concerning behavior, frustration responses, distress responses are a sign of poor motivation. Once again, attention seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated limit testing. If we think that a kid's frustration response is an indicator of poor motivation, then we're going to think that motivational strategies, consequences, rewards, and punishments are going to be the way to go. If there is a single take home message from this presentation, I hope people leave knowing that consequences are not problem solving strategies. They are simply behavior modification strategies. That's number one. And number two, kids do well if they can. This kid would very much like to be doing well. Doing well is preferable. This kid does not need more motivation added to the mix. They don't need more consequences. The kids who need something different have experienced more adult imposed consequences, especially punishment, than most of us will experience in this lifetime. They need something else. What they need isn't that complicated, but they do need us to start identifying their unsolved problems so we can focus on the right thing and so we can get our timing right, early, not late. And they need us to solve those problems collaboratively and proactively. That's what's been missing.
1,000% it's been missing. When we look at the educational struggles with time constraints and students who appear to be coping academically and behaviorally but are quietly overwhelmed, masking their distress, what are some simple CPS practices teachers can implement to support before things go into a larger experience for the child, youth, and the teacher or caregiver?
Masking is an interesting concept. Some kids are struggling to meet an expectation, but they're masking their distress or frustration response. This is why I always tell people, don't wait for the distress or the frustration response. That's waiting for behavior. That's going to make you late every time, and plus it's focused on the wrong thing. But if they're having difficulty meeting a particular expectation, that is going to show up on the assessment of skills and unsolved problems. The big question is masking that an expectation that you are largely able to meet, but with great difficulty. Now we might not know that the kid is having difficulty meeting the expectation. So in some instances, it's crystal clear. Bottom line is, this is why this model applies to all kids, not just those with concerning behavior. That's not how I slice the pie. It's not concerning behavior or no concerning behavior. Every kid has difficulty meeting expectations sometimes. Some kids can surmount that difficulty on their own sometimes. But even kids who can surmount difficulties on their own sometimes cannot surmount difficulties on their own all the time, which means that every kid is going to need help solving problems at one point or another. What we do want to do is make sure that kids know that there is a safe, trusted adult who's not going to be punitive, who's not going to be exclusionary, who's going to listen, who can be trusted if they're having difficulty meeting an expectation, but nobody has seen that yet. That's what we need for the kids who may be getting by, but masking that something is very difficult for them, even if they don't have a maladaptive frustration response.
Can you explain maladaptive for our listeners?
Um, oof. I use that as a term of convenience. Um, I don't actually slice the pie of frustration responses by adaptive and maladaptive. Truth is, my way of slicing the pie is lucky and unlucky frustration responses, which is, of course, an artificial distinction in and of itself. But I use that artificial distinction to make a very important point. Lucky frustration responses are things like whining, pouting, sulking, withdrawing, crying. Those frustration responses are more likely to be met with empathy, nurturance, and support. Unlucky frustration responses, what might substitute for maladaptive, screaming, swearing, hitting, spitting, kicking, biting, throwing, destroying, running, those are far less likely to be met with empathy, nurturance, support, and more likely to be met with the most punitive, exclusionary, disciplinary practices our society has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
But lucky or unlucky, frustration responses are communicating the exact same thing. There's an expectation a kid is having difficulty reliably meeting. So forgive my use of the term maladaptive for convenience purposes. To tell you the truth, I don't slice the pie by the nature of a kid's frustration response. Uh, Either the kid is able to meet a particular expectation or they're not.
Or they're
Either they're
not.
able to become that on their own or they're not. And whether it's causing big frustration responses or little frustration responses or no frustration responses, if they're having difficulty surmounting the problem on their own, they need our help.
So, Dr. Greene, we have a number of guests asking to encourage you to speak more about your book, the contents in your book. Do you have more learnings for us that you can impart so the listeners can lean in a little bit deeper to the importance of what this publication is about and how they can pull it into either their parenting or into the schools?
Chapter 1 is about all of what's made it harder to be a kid in the last 30 or 40 years. Chapter 2 are the big theme messages: expectation management, meeting kids where they're at, developmental variability, being proactive, not reactive, every kid being their own reference point. Chapter 3 is called Set Up to Be Late. Many people think it's the most important chapter in the book. I don't necessarily have an important chapter. I'm not ranking chapters by importance, but chapter 3 goes through all of the things we do in our schools with the best of intentions that are late. Among the examples being restraint and seclusion and de-escalating and detention and suspension and expulsion. But it's a very long list. One of the things I talk about is that in many schools, they have what I call the late staff, the folks who are expected to show up on the scene when a kid has already lost it. And the late staff have a piece of equipment that signifies that they are late. It's called the walkie-talkie. So much of how schools are structured, and this is not good practice for kids or educators, is around lateness. And that's just the way things are structured. It doesn't have to be the way things are structured. As I said, with a little intentionality, with a little commitment, we could be set up to be early. And that's what the rest of the book is about. Chapter 4 is about the assessment of skills and unsolved problems. Chapter 5 is about Plan B. Chapter 6, one of my favorites, is about how our structures that we have in schools for helping kids who we know need help make us late, take too much time. Some of those are systems that were designed to speed things up, but in fact slows things down and distract us. The process of determining whether a child needs special education can take forever while that kid and that kid's educators languish, waiting for the kid to get the help that everybody already knows the kid needs. So chapter
While
6 is,
punishing the child.
yeah. So chapter 6 is me and some of my colleagues. I have two co-authors on the book. One is a school principal. The other is the director of training at Lives in the Balance. How can we restructure that? What would an example of speeding things up so that we're earlier, not later, so that kids get the help they need faster? What would that look like? And of course, the assessment of skills and unsolved problems is going to be a huge part of that. Presently, most mechanisms for assessing kids who are struggling in schools do not assess their skills and do not assess their unsolved problems because they are very focused instead on the kids' concerning behaviors, their frustration
Mm-hmm.
responses.
Mm-hmm.
All things that could be changed. Once again, this is not the impossible dream, it's commitment and intentionality. So there's a taste of what what the new book, The Kids Who Aren't Okay, is about.
So you opened talking about zero tolerance.
Mm.
And when I hear your summary on chapter 6, I can't help but feel there's a marriage there. And in the sense of what zero tolerance looks like as it relates into, you know, what does, showing up late look like, right? And where our system, the organism, is designed to unintentionally, potentially, I don't know, but definitely evoke shame into that child, into that youth, and how they show up, and therefore have that sense of internal withdrawal that occurs, and how they're able to come back in to a trusted space to be able to engage in learning thoughtfully and safely, in a proactive way. And you have said something repetitively for decades, but you echoed it really strong today about how um, predictable behavior to the problem has been there. It's there. Like, we should be able to identify it at this point because it's been ongoing, like the math sheets frustration, for example.
Yes.
That frustration is showing up. It's not a new frustration. It's decades. It's since I was a child that I can remember. And I can remember, in the literal sense, showing up late for school. Actually, 60 days I've missed of school in grade 6. I have a recall on my report card, right? And showing up late and missing half days because entering to the school even 5 minutes late was punitive enough for me to go, I can't enter into that space safely because of who I was in my neurology, in my spirit, in my home life, and the marriage of that. And those same exasperations are still occurring for children and youth. And so when I think about your chapter 6, I get curious on how we can support our structures to help our children better in those successes, and moving away from constructs, as you spoke earlier, and move into that space of support and meeting children where they're at and developing that sense of agency and self-determination as a byproduct.
Step number 1 for schools, get the right lenses on. Concerning behavior is a frustration or distress response. It is being caused by unsolved problems, expectations. Kids are having difficulty meeting. Now that took me 15 seconds to say. And then, at a very practical level, make the assessment of skills and unsolved problems, or ASIP, which is free. I don't have a proprietary interest in this. The standard pre-referral triage instrument in your school system, in your province. It's going to give you the information that's been missing. Many people want to know, do you do the ASIP pre-multi-tiered systems of support? Sure. Post multi-tiered systems of support? Sure. I don't care when you do the ASIP. The fact that the kid is still struggling tells you that you probably haven't done the ASIP yet. because the kid is still struggling, which means we probably still haven't identified the kid's skills and unsolved problems. I don't care when people do the ASIP. I care that it gets done. Most of the kids for whom the ASIP is done are already identified. So we're already post MTSS, we're already even post special education. But the fact that this kid is still struggling tells us, and this is slightly blunt, but it's true, if the kid is still struggling, whatever we've done so far didn't work. So
That's right.
let's get the
So how
ASIP out there.
can this
Go
speak
ahead.
into the won't versus can't refrain?
This is can't.
Can you explain a little bit about that model to the listeners?
Well, won't versus can't is basically the difference between kids do all if they can and kids do all if they wanna. I'm a kids do all if they can guy. Kids do all if they can is the mantra of the CPS model, the mantra of my life's work as someone who was originally trained in motivational strategies and quickly came to see the significant limits of those strategies. Number one, they're focused on behavior. Number two, they don't solve any problems. Number three, punishments often cause concerning behaviors, frustration responses. Number four, a lot of people say, well, we don't punish, we only reward. I've seen just as many frustration responses caused by a kid failing to achieve an anticipated reward as a kid being punished. Those are cut from the exact same bolt of cloth. If you believe a kid won't, you believe that the kid is perfectly capable of reliably meeting a particular expectation and that it's your job to make them wanna meet that expectation. And making people wanna usually involves rewarding and punishing. I'm a kids do all if they can guy. I'm a can't not won't guy. The only thing that we get a little caught up there on, and this is brief, is people saying, well, the kid can meet the expectation sometimes. Doesn't that prove they can meet it all the time? No, it does not. It proves that we don't yet understand why the kid can meet the expectation sometimes and not others. I've got an idea. Let's ask the kid in the empathy step of Plan B. Then we'll find out.
I love that thought process, and when I work with families on this conversation and educators, I'll give them the analogy of, if you haven't fed yourself well today and you're in that hangry state, are you going to be responsive in the same way you normally would, whatever typical is for you? And so when we understand the aggravation on the neurology and the nervous system and how we respond in those experiences, and then ignite that empathetic spirit in ourselves to go, okay, now look at the neurodivergent child who, that's their neurology, that's their baseline normal of, sometimes they can do great, sometimes they can do okay, and sometimes they're just going to struggle, and that's it. And that doesn't warrant punishment, it warrants support. Just like that person who's hangry, the support is, what's the solution? You feed them, right? And you know, and an hour later, you're going to have a different outcome. And so when we have the right supports in place and move away from can't versus won't, which I think is such a really important framing in your book, we're providing tools to equip and filling some of those voids that our systems are wrestling with. And your approaches really allow for some grounding for that. And I think that's really the big piece that we're looking for in community, as we continue to move towards agency and consent and school, what they call, you know, school to violence pipeline. There's growing evidence that neurodivergent children are placed in low autonomy, high demand environments without genuine collaboration, and their distress escalates as a response to the getting labeled as fill in the blank, right? So I'm curious, Dr. Greene, how can you speak into this with the CPS model and systems that to help systems to understand that a child's need for agency isn't the barrier to safety, but actually the foundation to it?
Results speak loudly. As we've already said just a few minutes ago, if a kid is still struggling, whatever we're doing now isn't working. And what we're doing now is probably more traditional. There's absolutely no harm in testing out what will happen if we involve the kid in the problem-solving process, give the kid agency, give the kid, through practice, an incredibly important life skill, problem solving, enhance a bunch of other skills that are important just for being a human being, listening, empathy, taking another person's perspective, appreciating how one's actions are affecting other people, figuring out what's making it hard for you to meet an expectation, articulating that in a way that other people can understand, generating alternative solutions, resolving problems without conflict. These are some of the most important skills in life. Wouldn't we want to start doing things that way as early as possible, rather than continuing to ignore the voices of the neurodivergent community, which has been telling us for a very long time that things seemingly as benign as planned ignoring and sticker charts cause them great harm? I've heard from neurodivergent adults who've told me that they were identified at a very early age as the kid who didn't get the sticker. They have said, if you wouldn't ignore an infant in distress, why would you ignore an 8-year-old in distress? This comes down to, if you don't understand that concerning behavior is a frustration or distress response, you are in danger of interpreting it another, far less productive, far less compassionate, far less accurate way.
And that rolls into how policies get created as a byproduct as well, right? And how that support rolls into schools, into our ministries, like Ministry of Child and Family Development, and the impact and implications of that, how funding is afforded or not, because we're looking at behavior versus distress response as a byproduct and a presentation of the diagnosis and the neurology, correct? So when we look at that and those risks of impediment of supports around this conversation, what would you say is the human and economic cost of the crisis we're choosing not to prevent this?
You end up losing a lot of kids unnecessarily. You end up spending a lot of money on kids who we're losing. One thing I did want to say, another thing that's in the book, as long as people were asking, is me pointing out that focusing on behavior, which is late, is an industry. De-escalating and restraining kids is an industry. This is not just about doing the right thing. This is about pushing back against industries that are pushing us to focus on behavior and to manage crises. So we've got our work cut out for us. It can be done, but there's a lot of money pushing focusing on behavior and pushing being late. We got to recognize that too.
You almost moved me to tears, Dr. Greene, because this is as a community, our daily experience, and for many, very real fear of the impact of an implication of not lifting this voice up, not lifting this conversation up, and making sure it's centered so that our policies and the impacts of policies through procedure doesn't remove agency from children and families, allows a pathway for support, and support those needs, versus measuring support based on perceived presentation. That diagnosis is there to serve, to inform how to support. And when we start stepping away from that, we are absolutely beholden to a multi-million-dollar industry versus a model of care. And it's one of the really foundational reasons of efficacy why I lift your work up so much in community, Dr. Greene, because that spirit that you walk in for our children, to allow space for our children to be authentically themselves while guiding them is the heart of your work, and trying to support educators and caregivers and support workers in that pathway, moving away from seclusion, moving away from restraint, moving toward heart, moving towards agency, moving towards that individual, that child's best self, whatever that means.
Yep.
And that's really amazing. So a lot of the things I've been asking you, Dr. Greene, are those preloaded questions, and we have other real-time questions coming in, and I just want to present to you a couple of them if I can, if you're willing to share some more time with us. One person saying right now collaboration doesn't seem to feel okay to my 6-year-old's perception of autonomy, which is that everything should unfold the way he wants and never any other way. How do the CPS model, how do you work with the CPS model with this?
Well, I don't know if that's too different from a lot of 6-year-olds who are still getting their footing, still learning how, if we haven't forced them to listen to somebody else's concerns. So this might take a little bit of practice, but even 6-year-olds are not real enthusiastic about conflict. What I do find, and so there is good reason for them to try to participate in the process, but notice that the empathy step comes first. That's where the kid's voice is being heard. That is very reassuring to a lot of kids. Now, I've always thought that the main reason it was very reassuring to a lot of kids is because they weren't used to having their voice heard at all. So kids are frequently very eager to participate in the empathy step, even though it's not muscle memory for them. Somebody's listening, somebody's curious, somebody's working with them to figure out something that's hard for them, whether that's difficulty brushing teeth before going to bed at night, or difficulty being in bed by 9 p.m. with the lights and electronics off, or you name it. Somebody's finally curious and somebody's helping them figure out what's hard about that. The empathy step is first. A lot of kids are accustomed to having adult concerns not only go first, but be the only concerns that are entered into the equation. And they are also accustomed to having solutions imposed on them by adults who think they already know what's making it hard for a kid to meet a particular expectation. So in each kid who's having trouble participating, I'm trying to figure out, is this muscle memory? Those kids tend to come around fairly quickly because this is so different. Is this developmental? I wouldn't say that those kids come around slowly. What does this kid need to be able to participate in this process? Beyond that, if we can get them to participate, those 3 steps of Plan B are going to serve them very well.
Wonderful, thank you. And so another question is, says, I would love to hear about how to work the CPS model with PDAers who often find questions being asked a demand and feels too much.
Well, number one, I should say, there are kids diagnosed with pathological demand avoidance who do not experience the asking of questions, as in the empathy step, to be difficult. So we don't want to treat any population as monolithic. And pathological demand avoidance is as heterogeneous as any other population. And in fact, there are kids who do not carry the PDA diagnosis who have difficulty participating in the empathy step for one reason or another, sometimes because the questions feel like too much for them and they want to avoid them. The quick answer is find a different way. And that's the challenge, is finding a different way to gather information from kids if asking them questions is difficult. Now, as you might imagine, because the voice of the kid is so critical in the CPS model, we have come across or designed all kinds of different ways for kids to participate in the provision of information about what's making it hard for them to meet an expectation without necessarily having to do it through the spoken word, without necessarily having to do it through a question being asked directly. Beyond that, it's going to come down to each individual kid. I don't want to, here's the interesting thing. What I don't want to say is that the kid is having difficulty responding to questions because they have PDA. I don't want to say that, because that keeps me from exploring what's making it hard for this PDA kid to participate in the process. If there's any kid who's having difficulty participating in the process, I'm not going to use the diagnosis as the explanation for that. I still need to find out what's hard for this. And worst case scenario, we're guessing and we're giving the kids some way, sometimes fingers, sometimes tapping on a yes or no, some way to verify that our guess is accurate. So there's ways to get around the asking of a question to gather information. There's definitely ways to help kids participate without using words. Sometimes those actually overlap a fair amount. But I don't want to use PDA as the reason. Each PDA kid is an individual, and it's our job to figure out what's getting in the way of this kid participating in the process, no matter what their diagnosis.
And the importance of ensuring that we're recognizing each of them are individuals is so critical, right? Like that goes back to the whole foundation of what you're speaking about. Is there another question, is there specific frameworks for kids who are not able to articulate what's going on with their needs during these steps? Is there a way to articulate that for you to them, and how a parent and or caregiver or educator can support through that?
I don't know if I completely understood that one.
That's all I have, so I'll read it again. Is there a specific framework for kids who are not able to articulate what's going on with their needs during these steps?
Got it. Okay. So I'm going to take articulate to mean speak, though that might not necessarily be the case. And once again, worst case scenario. It's okay for us adults to guess and to give the kid some mechanism for letting us know if our guess is accurate. I get a lot of information from kids by teaching them 5 fingers. 5 means very true, 4 means pretty true, 3 means sort of true, 2 means not very true, 1 means not true at all. Then what I do is I make statements, and all they have to do is hold up fingers to let me know how true my statement is. I get a ton of information that way. And if 5 fingers is too much for the kid, I'll go with 3. If 3 is too much for the kid, I'll go with the usual 2. Assistive technology can help me there. AAC devices, pictures can help me there. There are so many options for helping kids participate besides through the spoken word. Even if they're having difficulty articulating, we can guess. And through guessing, often they start to get the hang of it. And then often, but not always, they start to not need us to guess anymore. Development is incremental. Got to get the kid communicating somehow. and then we'll see if we can help them communicate in a way that's even easier for them and maybe even easier for us to understand.
Communication is key. And so in that, I have a couple of questions coming in. If you're able to go over the 3 steps in the Plan B model one more time for our listeners to support them.
Sure. And just let me let everybody know, there's a boatload of free resources on the Lives in the Balance website. Lives, Lives, in the balance.org. Find your way to the guided tour, whether you're a parent or an educator, and you will learn all about those 3 steps and watch them come alive before your very eyes in video. But here's the basics. The empathy step is where you're gathering critical information from a kid about what's making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation. There are a lot of technicalities to the empathy step, especially what we call drilling strategies, probing strategies that help us adults not get stuck not knowing what to say, help kids continue talking, continue to prove to kids that we are very curious and eager to understand. So the drilling strategies are a very big part of the empathy step, but the basic ingredient of the empathy step is information gathering. The define it all concern step is where we adults are answering the question, why is it important that the expectation be met? So in the empathy step, we're trying to get the answer to the question, what's making it hard for the kid to meet the expectation? In the define it all concern step, us adults are saying why it's important that the expectation be met. Let me give you a little bit more detail on that. Why would it be important that the expectation be met? I can think of 2 reasons, neither mutually exclusive. Because of how the unsolved problem is affecting the kid, and or because of how the unsolved problem is affecting other people. And within those 2 categories, it's almost always about health, safety, learning, and or fairness. The invitation is where kid and caregiver are putting their heads together, collaborating on a solution. The solution has to meet 2 criteria. It's got to be realistic. Both parties got to be able to do what they're agreeing to do. And it's got to be mutually satisfactory, meaning the solution truly addresses the concerns of both parties. While you are giving the kid the first crack at the solution, if the kid doesn't have any ideas, it's fine for the adult to kick in. Doesn't really matter whose idea it is, but giving the kid the first crack is very good strategy. A, it gives the kid practice at generating solutions, and B, it lets the kid know beyond a shadow of a doubt you're actually interested in their ideas.
And on your website, Lives in the Balance is where we can find resources for this, correct?
More resources than people are going to know what to do with, and they're all free.
Wonderful. It's pretty wonderful that you're extending your support in a low barrier way for families and educators, especially in the climate that we exist in today, Dr. Greene. Do you have any other takeaways you want the listeners to carry with them as they exit today?
Well, the number 1 message is kids do well if they can. The number 2 message is the definition of good parenting and good teaching, meeting kids where they're at. Each kid is their own reference point. We are all developmentally variable. And the way to accomplish many things, relationship building, communication enhancing, reducing concerning behavior, enhancing skills, is by solving problems collaboratively and proactively with kids, where we're not only solving problems, but we're modeling for kids and giving them critical practice at some of the most important skills that define the human nature, what it means to be human: honesty, taking another person's perspective, appreciating how one's actions are affecting other people, and perhaps most important, empathy, something that seems to be in relatively short supply these days, probably because in a lot of circles, we're just throwing solutions at each other, which is known as a power struggle. Power is not the solution to what ails us. Collaboration is.
Collaborative solutions, the underbelly of all your messages, and a super important message indeed. So, Dr. Ross, we want to thank you for sharing your time with us, and thank you for your decades of focused and understanding work around distress and unmet needs and the importance of problem solving rather than responding with punishment or exclusion. It's really foundational to our hearts. It's always a joy to hold space with you, and I loved how you always pick up the call when I reach out, and we need more doctors like you that lead with spirit and care. You do that so authentically when you talk about authenticity and character and those things. You model that so well, and it's so refreshing in today's day. So today, the theme shared reminded us that behavior is communication, and that people and children do well when they can, and that lasting change comes from listening and flexibility and shared solution-focused problem-solving approaches. These ideas closely align with us at AutismBC and our commitment to dignity and belonging in neuroaffirming supports across the lifespan. We're grateful for everyone who joined us here today, whether you listened closely, stepped away as you needed, or continuing to move forward to reflect in your own time. His website is available for you to go and do some deeper reflections. Your presence here mattered. And as a gentle reminder, AutismBC is a not-for-profit organization, and community support is what allows us to host people like Dr. Ross Greene and bring in that continued advocacy, education, and connection across BC. In fact, I just want to acknowledge today we did have people from across Canada joining us, and over 20 school districts represented here in BC. So that's pretty wonderful. And I want to encourage each of you, if you feel moved to support our work, optional donations and memberships are available. Stay connected to find additional learning opportunities, access to grounding resources, and lived experience in neuroaffirmative ways at autismbc.ca. As a reminder, during the month of April, we'll be giving away one copy of The Kids Who Aren't Okay in each region of our province. Please watch your email and our website for more. That being said, thank you so much again, Dr. Ross Greene, for this part of your shared learning with us and for your care for the autistic and neurodivergent community that you enter in with such passion and heart for everybody. My hands to you.
Thank you for giving me voice and having me be heard.
It's a good voice indeed. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Take care.
In the world so calm and deep, where silence sings and colors sleep, no noisy crowds, no blinding light, just gentle dreams that glow at night. Their eyes like silent stars, so pierce, so bright, they shimmer soft, they shine the light. They speak in ways we may not hearts the love will show.